We are hosting today Julia Ward, MEP from the Labour Party. Thanks for joining us today. So how would you express your feelings about coming across with Ocalan's ideas, first of all?
Well, I suppose coming across the ideas didn't happen first. First, for me, was meeting with a constituent of mine in the northwest of England. So he was a Kurdish student, and he came to my office in Manchester to ask for help regarding raising awareness about the situation for his family back home in a small village in northern Kurdistan, somewhere near Ahmed, I don't remember the name. And I had never been aware of the situation of the Kurds until he spoke to me. So this would be probably 2015. And because I was elected as an MEP at that time, and I had responsibility for everybody who lived in the northwest of England, I wanted to take his concerns seriously. And I then went on a study visit with the European grassroots anti-racist movement to Ahmed, where I met with people from HDP. I met with the Comers. I met with families, the bereaved parents of young people who'd been burned in the basements in Cizre. I went to Nusaybin. I went to the refugee camp for the Yazidis that was being looked after by the municipality. And I began to learn at that point, if you like, the visions and the ideas, the really progressive ideas that Mr. Abdullah Ocalan had been promoting for a very long time. And I began to realize that many of the principles and the ethos of Ocalan's ideas were also things that I espoused. So women's rights, care for the environment, grassroots democracy.
After all, you're coming across the Ocalan's ideas and your visits to Kurdistan as well.
Yeah.
Also, you become a member of Imrali delegation since 2016, if I'm right. What was the progress in Imrali delegation? What is the latest development? What is your updates to us from Imrali delegation?
Yeah, actually I led the Imrali delegation, I think it was 2017. Yeah, I led the delegation in 2017. And I suppose that impressed upon me the seriousness of the violations against Mr. Ocalan, the isolation, the serious situation of incarceration, isolation on an island prison, and the removal of many of his human rights. I don't think I'd really understood the seriousness of that situation until I was involved in the delegation. I think that one gains credibility by engaging with the issues. So I've always taken every opportunity I could to learn more about the situation and to try and keep updated about it. So if I just move to the delegation we just had, we went to Ankara and we had meetings with Pervin Buldan, where she's a very strong woman and I really respect her, and she's very clear about the situation regarding Mr. Ocalan's continued incarceration and isolation. And while some small steps were made last year, because the pressure of the hunger strikes actually opened a window of opportunity in the end, where Ocalan was allowed a visit by his brother. But this is not enough, there are certain international norms and human rights conditions which should be upheld. And so one individual visit does not actually answer the accusations against the Turkish state about how they are treating political prisoners. So I think it was very important for us to understand how the HDP view this situation. And actually, Mrs. Buldan was really clear also about Mr. Ocalan did not want people to put their lives at risk for him. You know, he also understood about the Turkish state's concern about their own security as well. So this is not an unreasonable man, and I think that is something which we need to bring more into our conversations at a political level. We also had meetings with a lot of trade unionists, and I think this is really important because on the delegation was the acting secretary of the Welsh Trade Union Congress, Siobhan Taj, and so she is there because she understands that being a trade unionist means also to demonstrate international solidarity with workers everywhere. And one of the most terrible situations about the impasse that has happened between the Turkish state and the Kurdish question has been the attacks on ordinary working people who were removed from their jobs.
Very briefly, what is the most important topics that came out the last visit of the delegation, very briefly?
Well, I would say the most important thing is that day-to-day life for many people in the municipalities where Kurdish politicians were elected, in those places, day-to-day life has become unbearable. People cannot, they are really suffering to do ordinary things. And this, I think, this demonstrates, I think, that, you know, years of harassment, years of overriding democratic decisions by the population to elect their own mayors, to elect their own MPs, these people being removed from their positions, being put in prison, being detained, the mayors being replaced by unelected trustees. I began to think about, to put myself in the situation, yeah? If this was happening in my city, so if this was Manchester, for example, and the town hall had become like, you know, a very militarized building with barbed wire and surveillance and armed soldiers with guns, and you were a simple citizen who just wanted to go and talk about the collection of the rubbish, or you were a parent who wanted to go and talk about an issue at school with your child, or where they might go to you know, for after school activity or something simple like this, yeah? This would be your situation. You would have to face this kind of militarized building. And I think this is completely unacceptable. And to be living under these conditions on a day-to-day basis is really wearing people down. And that, I think, is like the biggest message that we came back, that this, because the state apparatus is entering everyday life, and it is making life very difficult for ordinary people, for civilians, for the children and young people and families, for the frail and elderly, for, you know, for women, for people who are already suffering, for widows. And actually what happens in a situation where you are living in a militarized zone all the time is that those rights are taken away from you and you live in fear. And I think one of the first things, you know, I mean, I'm aware Turkey is the biggest jailer of reporters and journalists in the world now. And the shutting down of media organizations and television stations, and, you know, is absurd, frankly. I mean, it is horrific to see this happening in a European country.
If we get back to Öcalan's isolation situation, what needs to be get done in Europe especially? So what is the point of view of the, let's say, Imrali delegation, which all the members come from the unionists, MPs, MEPs.
Yeah.
So what needs to be get done for Mr. Abdullah Ocalan?
Well,
freedom for Abdullah.
Absolutely. Well, freedom's really important, and the campaign title, which is Freedom for Ocalan, is a very important message to all people fighting for freedom around the world, that we must be in solidarity with this campaign. But I think what I learned is that we have to go through a number of processes, and it's important to engage with politicians, to be in the places where decisions are made and where there is some political influence. So, for example, the Permanent People's Tribunal that happened in Paris, which heard a case, so it was the Democratic Lawyers Association who took 2 days to listen to evidence about the violations against the Kurdish people by the Turkish state and the Turkish military. And the result of that, the verdict of their deliberations, were read out and announced in the European Parliament. And I think this is an important message. Like, we have to go through those processes, and we have to engage at political level wherever we can, in order to try and continue to build a case. Also, the recent ruling in the Belgian court that heard some very important evidence about whether or not the PKK could be considered a terrorist organisation, and the Belgian courts have upheld the earlier verdict, which is in fact that the PKK cannot be called a terrorist organisation because it's involved in a non-international armed conflict. We have to build on those things. All the people who come on the Imrali delegation year after year, for example. I mean, this year, Ogmund Johansen, who was previously the Icelandic Minister of Justice, he has been a previous Imrali delegate, and myself, we have been more than once. We also had Shavana Taj, who was General Secretary of the Welsh TUC. And this is very important because sometimes politicians are a bit afraid, but trade unionists cannot be afraid, okay? Yeah? And sometimes civil society has to take the first steps in order for politicians to follow. So I know that she will be able to be a very strong voice in her own sphere of influence, both in Wales, where in fact they got involved in the issue because there was a hunger striker in Cardiff, yeah? And so she didn't know anything until this situation happened, but then she learns about that, then she comes on the delegation with me. She's going to now speak at a really high level with the TUC in Scotland, with the TUC in England. My trade union, Unite, has always been very, very supportive of the Kurdish question, of the Kurdish cause. There is a standing, it's a standing item at all the executive meetings. So I think these are things we have to continue put together, and we have to keep bringing more people into this group of allies. Yeah, we have to build this alliance. Yeah, so I learned there the reality of what is possible actually when Mr. Ocalan's ideas are put into practice, and it's inspiring.
thank you very much for joining us today.